everyone. So this is a blood smear lab that you were supposed to do. And in this lab, you were supposed to look at a blood sample under the microscope to look at the different white blood cells that you're going to learn about in the immune system. So in the innate and adaptive immune system. So here in this blood sample, we see red blood cells called erythrocytes, the different types of white blood cells called leukocytes, and then here's a platelet. So just to give some background, blood has 3 different components. So if you look at a blood sample, you see our red blood cells, which we call erythrocytes. And remember, cyte just means cell. So erythro, red blood cells, and their function is to carry oxygen in the blood, and they carry it throughout your body. When you look at a blood sample, there's also platelets. Platelets are important for clotting so that a person doesn't bleed out, and they also play a small role in limiting the site of infection during inflammation. Leukocytes are white blood cells, and these are the most important blood cells that are part of the immune system, so in defending you against different pathogens. And again, here with leukocytes, there's many different types of leukocytes. So Eosinophils, neutrophils, basophils, lymphocytes, monocytes are all white blood cells, are all leukocytes. I didn't put it here, but just to make it more accurate, blood also, when you spin it, so you see the erythrocytes, the platelets, the leukocytes, there's also the majority of blood, which is water, the fluid component, that's just called the plasma, but I didn't add it here. This is what a typical blood sample looks like under the microscope. I mean, this is a perfect image, so I'll show you what typical images look like. And just a little bit more background, let me put this all out. Okay, as a reminder, our immune system is split between innate immunity and adaptive immunity, and white blood cells or leukocytes play a role in both. When we look at the innate immune system, which is the one that fights non-specific pathogens, so everything, we see neutrophils, eosinophils, basophils, monocytes, natural killer cells. The adaptive immune system also has white blood cells that defend you, and the adaptive immunity defends you against specific pathogens. So it's the one that differentiates, like, for example, an E. coli infection from an influenza infection. This is the immune system that makes antibodies. But when we take your whole immune system, innate and adaptive, there's a bunch of leukocytes involved. So here, if we look at a blood sample, just as a reminder from lecture, neutrophils are the white blood cells that are involved in phagocytosis, where they eat microbes. So we all have neutrophils in our blood. This is a picture of an eosinophil, and these cells destroy parasites, so worms, and they also play a role in inflammation. Basophils right here are cells, white blood cells, that play a role in inflammation. Monocytes are also important for phagocytosis, so macrophages are monocytes. Natural killer cells are cells that are important in attacking virally infected cells and cancer cells. And then T lymphocytes and B lymphocytes play a role in adaptive immunity. And this is just a lymphocyte. We don't have fancy enough material to distinguish whether this is specifically a T lymphocyte or a B lymphocyte. So in this lab, your goal is to look at blood smears, so blood samples, and identify different leukocytes. So like, for example, differentiate a basophil from a monocyte. You were supposed to work together, and when you look at anyone's blood sample, the frequency of each white blood cell, of each leukocyte from most to least, is the most one we have is neutrophils, then lymphocytes, then monocytes, eosinophils, and then the least cell that we have is basophils. And a good mnemonic to memorize this is never let monkeys eat bananas. So the most cell type we have is neutrophil. So when you look at a blood sample, you're going to see a lot of this type of white blood cell. You're going to see a lot of this. And then the least amount is basophils, these ones. And again, neutrophils play a very, very important role in phagocytosis, so it makes sense that there's a high amount of each. Basophils play a role in inflammation. So your objectives is to identify the different blood cells under the microscope and know the frequency. So the frequency is never let monkeys eat bananas. So just know the order of the most common to the least common leukocyte. And just to show you guys some pictures, here are pictures. Okay, actually, let me summarize it. So when you look at a blood sample under the microscope, you're going to see all the cell types. But here we're focusing, or we're zooming in on one specific leukocyte or white blood cell to show it to you, but typically you're going to see a lot of different things. So here's a blood sample. Right here is a neutrophil at 400 times total magnification. This is 1,000 times total magnification. The way we identify neutrophils, besides them being the most frequent white blood cell, is they have multi-lobed nucleus and granules. Remember, they're granulocytes, so when you look at neutrophils, they have like different grains in them, and they have multi-lobed nucleus. So you see a lot of different lobes in the nucleus, or circles. That's what neutrophils look like. Lymphocytes are the second most frequent cell, and our staining isn't especially enough to differentiate T cells and B cells, so we're just going to lump them as lymphocytes. This is what lymphocytes look like at 400 times magnification. This is 1,000 times magnification. They're the smallest cells with the largest nucleus. So when you look at a blood sample, they're very small cells and the nucleus is very large. Then monocytes, which are less frequent than the other two white blood cells. Here's 400x magnification and 1,000x. They're the largest cells, so when you look at a monocyte, they're very large. Remember, lymphocytes are the smallest. Monocytes are very large, and the nucleus is U-shaped. So here is our monocyte, largest cells. Lymphocytes are smallest cells. Remember, neutrophils are multi-lobed with granules or little specks inside. Eosinophils, remember, these cells play a role in destroying parasites, so parasitic infections if you have a worm infection. They're granular, and we see a two-lobed nucleus. So here's eosinophil, so two-lobed nucleus right there. And I know a lot of them look very similar. Basophils are the least common type of white blood cell or leukocyte, and they have a lot of granules. Remember, basophils play an important role in inflammation, and those granules are histamine that you see here. So when someone, we'll learn about this later, but when someone has an allergy attack or a different type of infection that does a lot of inflammation, these basophils release the histamine. So this is what basophils look like. They're very granular. I think they're the easiest to identify because they look very different. And then here are pictures that are more realistic of looking at a blood sample with a lot of different types of cells. So here in this picture, we see neutrophils and lymphocytes. So that's a neutrophil, that's a neutrophil, that's a lymphocyte. I know that's a lymphocyte because they're the smallest cells and they have a very large nucleus. Neutrophils have multi-lobed nuclei inside them, or nucleus. And then here is a neutrophil and a monocyte. Okay, and here is a monocyte and a lymphocyte. Remember, monocytes are the largest. So here's the lymphocyte, here's a monocyte. Here's a picture of a neutrophil and an eosinophil. So here they are, these two types of cells. And then here's a neutrophil, a monocyte, and an eosinophil. So right here, the one with multiple lobes. Okay, so the largest cell is the monocyte. Neutrophil is the one multi-lobed, and here is the eosinophil. And that's it for this lecture. So just know what the cells look like.